In Beijing, cameras clicked as Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning stepped up to the podium, poised, composed and deliberate. The timing was no coincidence. Hours earlier, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent had issued a pointed warning. If China reversed its decision on rare earth exports, Washington could respond with new tariffs. That warning rippled across markets, reviving fears of another economic confrontation between the world's two largest economies. China's answer, however, came not through bluster, but through calm diplomacy. Mao Ning's words, measured and carefully chosen, carried a message of continuity and restraint. She said, regarding China's policy of controlling rare earth exports, the relevant Chinese authorities have repeatedly reiterated their position. Her tone left no ambiguity. Beijing viewed this issue as one grounded in policy consistency, not political posturing. Rare earths are not just another trade commodity. They are the foundation of the modern technological world, used in everything from smartphones and electric vehicles to advanced missile systems. Control over these materials has long been a source of strategic leverage for Beijing. China currently dominates nearly 70% of global rare earth production, making any shift in its export policy capable of shaking global supply chains overnight. The tension stems from an earlier policy decision that Beijing had adjusted to ensure what it calls sustainable and responsible production. Washington, under Bessent's leadership at the Treasury, viewed those restrictions as a potential geopolitical weapon, one that could undermine America's ability to manufacture and compete in critical technologies. Bessent's warning was clear. The United States would not sit idle if China tightened control again. Inside the briefing room, the journalist leaned forward as Mao Ning continued, I believe the results of the China-US economic and trade talks in Kuala Lumpur fully demonstrate that dialogue and cooperation are the right way to resolve the issue, she said. Her emphasis on dialogue echoed Beijing's long-standing narrative that confrontation only deepens mistrust, while cooperation stabilizes global markets. The reference to Kuala Lumpur was significant. Just weeks ago, high-level Chinese and American delegations had met there to discuss supply chains, export controls, and the lingering fallout of the previous tariff wars. Both sides had described those meetings as constructive, but few details emerged. Mao Ning's remarks suggest that Beijing viewed that dialogue as proof that diplomacy, not economic coercion, could prevent escalation. Still, beneath the surface of her calm statement lay a firm message: China would not yield to external pressure. Threats and pressure will not help, Mao Ning said, her tone sharpening slightly before returning to her core message. Currently, I believe the top priority for China and the United States is to seriously implement the important consensus reached by the two heads of state during their meeting in Busan. That meeting between President Xi Jinping and US President Donald Trump in the South Korean city of Busan was more than symbolic. It was a rare moment of face-to-face diplomacy after years of trade friction and mutual suspicion. Both leaders had pledged to stabilize relations, avoid decoupling, and maintain open channels for dialogue on issues ranging from AI governance to critical minerals. In that context, Mao Ning's reference to implementing the consensus served as both a reminder and a challenge. Beijing was signaling that Washington must honor the Busan commitments that included respecting China's sovereign right to regulate strategic resources. As she spoke, China's state media amplified her remarks across major platforms. Commentaries in People's Daily and Global Times argued that Bessent's warning risked undermining the fragile trust rebuilt during recent summits. They portrayed China's export policy as transparent, environmentally conscious, and aligned with global market rules. Economists in Beijing and Shanghai echoed that view. They noted that rare earth controls were not aimed at punishing specific countries, but ensuring long-term resource security. As one scholar from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences told CCTV, China must protect its natural advantages responsibly. If the US chooses confrontation, it only harms both economies. Across the Pacific, analysts in Washington read the moment differently. To them, Mao Ning's calm tone masked a deeper strategic signal. China, they argued, was preparing to test US resolve, not through direct confrontation, but by using its rare earth dominance as leverage in broader negotiations. The stakes were high. Rare earths power not just consumer electronics, but also the defense technologies central to America's national security. In past years, similar disputes have sent shockwaves through the market. When Beijing briefly restricted exports of rare earths to Japan in 2010 amid territorial tensions, prices soared by more than 400%, forcing major economies to diversify their supply chains. Now, with geopolitical rivalries deeper and the stakes higher, any hint of renewed export limits could trigger global consequences. Yet Mao Ning's delivery remained carefully balanced. She avoided direct criticism of Bessent or the United States, instead framing China's stance as one of reason and responsibility. Dialogue and cooperation are the right way to resolve the issue, she repeated, drawing a subtle line between diplomacy and threat. Her language mirrored that used by Xi Jinping himself during the Busan summit. Xi had urged both sides to manage differences constructively and expand areas of cooperation. For Beijing, rare earths were not a bargaining chip. They were a test of whether Washington would respect China's policy autonomy. By the time Mao Ning concluded her remarks, her words had already begun shaping headlines across the region. Markets in Shanghai and Shenzhen saw a slight uptick in shares of rare earth producers, while US analysts scrambled to interpret the statement's implications. In the corridors of Washington, officials at the Commerce Department and the National Security Council convened urgent discussions about contingency plans for supply chain stability. The broader context adds another layer to this story. China's rare earth strategy is now deeply intertwined with its Made in China 2025 initiative, a blueprint for achieving technological self-reliance. Rare earths are a linchpin in that vision, fueling industries from green energy to advanced robotics. Any external attempt to influence that policy touches the very core of Beijing's long-term ambitions. Meanwhile, Scott Bessent's own remarks reflected growing frustration in Washington. The United States has been investing heavily in alternative supply routes, from mining projects in Australia to refining partnerships in Canada. Yet even with those efforts, full independence from Chinese rare earths remains years away. Bessent's warning, therefore, was as much a statement of concern as it was a strategic signal. In Beijing, however, the narrative remains consistent. China is not weaponizing rare earths, it is safeguarding them. Officials highlight environmental considerations, noting the ecological damage caused by overmining in past decades. New export guidelines, they argue, ensure that rare earths are produced sustainably and sold responsibly, in line with both domestic and global environmental standards. At the same time, Chinese policymakers have emphasized that global supply security should be based on mutual respect and non-discrimination. They often cite past US restrictions on semiconductors and advanced chip-making tools as examples of the double standards they face. To many in Beijing, Bessent's warning appeared to confirm that Washington was willing to politicize trade when convenient. Still, despite the sharp undertones, both sides have reason to avoid escalation. The US and China remain deeply interdependent, their economies tied through trade, technology, and investment flows worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Any new tariff war would reverberate through the global economy, especially as growth slows in both nations. In this sense, Mao Ning's statement was as much a reassurance to global markets as it was a rebuttal to Washington. By emphasizing dialogue and consensus, she was signaling that Beijing does not seek confrontation. Her closing line captured that balance succinctly. We hope both sides can meet each other halfway and safeguard the stability of global supply chains. The cameras flashed one last time as Mao Ning stepped away from the podium. The press conference ended as quietly as it had begun. Outside, in the crisp November air of Beijing, the questions lingered. Would the United States follow through on its threat? Would China adjust its rare earth policies further or hold firm? For now, both sides appear to be testing each other's resolve, carefully, cautiously, through words rather than actions. But as global demand for critical minerals surges and as competition over technological dominance intensifies, this rare earth dispute may soon become a defining chapter in the evolving US-China economic relationship. What remains clear is that in an era of mutual dependence and mistrust, diplomacy, no matter how measured or brief, still matters. And as Mao Ning's words echo through Beijing's press halls and Washington's think tanks alike, they serve as both a warning and an invitation. Dialogue remains the only element rarer than the earth itself.